Ernest Anderson came home unannounced that December afternoon and heard music playing in his house. He froze. For 3 years, his home in Denver had been silent. His 2 autistic daughters hadn't spoken, hadn't laughed, hadn't made a sound. So where was that music coming from? His heart pounded as he moved toward the living room. Then he heard it. Child laughter, bright and real. When he opened the door, what he saw stopped him cold. Ernest hadn't planned to come home early that day. For 3 years, he'd avoided his house like it was cursed. His wife, Catherine, had died in a car accident when their twin daughters, Ella and Lily, were only 3. The girls had been making small progress with their autism before the tragedy. A few words, brief eye contact, tiny smiles. After Catherine died, they disappeared completely. They stopped speaking, stopped looking at anyone, wouldn't let him touch them. Ernest spent over $2 million trying to reach them, 15 specialists over 3 years, behavioral therapy, speech therapy. Nothing worked. 6 weeks ago, he hired Melinda Brown to manage the house, 29 years old, quiet, efficient. She cleaned, cooked, and stayed out of the way. Ernest barely noticed her. That Tuesday, his meeting ended early. He drove home. When he stepped inside, he heard music playing. Soft, classical. His pulse raced. The house had been silent for 3 years. Then he heard laughter. High-pitched, real. His daughters. He hadn't heard them laugh since the morning Catherine made them breakfast, hours before she died. Ernest reached the living room door and pushed it open. What he saw made the world stop. Melinda stood in the center of the room, arms raised, moving like water, and on either side of her, wearing pink tutus, were Ella and Lily, dancing, their faces glowing with pure joy. They were fully present, alive in a way he hadn't seen in 3 years. His briefcase hit the floor. 3 heads turned. Then Ella did something impossible. She looked directly at him, held his gaze, and reached one small hand toward him. Ernest dropped to his knees. For the first time in 3 years, when he reached for his daughters, they didn't pull away. When the music stopped, he looked up at Melinda, tears streaming down his face. "How?" he whispered. Melinda knelt beside them. "They were never unreachable, Mr. Anderson. They just needed someone willing to meet them where they are." Ernest stared at her. 15 specialists had failed, and this woman, a maid he barely knew, had done the impossible in 6 weeks. What he didn't know was that Melinda had a past, a calling she'd walked away from, and God had been quietly preparing her for this exact moment. Before we continue, like this video, subscribe, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Because sometimes God puts the right person in your life exactly when you need them most. Ernest didn't say a word about what he'd seen. He just started coming home earlier. First an hour early, then 2. By the end of the week, he was leaving the office by noon, making excuses his assistant stopped questioning. He'd slip into the house quietly and watch from doorways, from the kitchen, from the top of the stairs. Always careful, always hidden. What he saw broke him in ways he didn't know were possible. Melinda wasn't doing therapy. She was just living with them, humming while she folded laundry, her body swaying gently. And Lily, who hadn't responded to anything in 3 years, would stop rocking and watch her, actually watch her. When Melinda set the table, she'd place each item down with rhythm, plate, fork, cup, napkin. And across the room, Ella would move her hands in the same pattern, like she was learning a song without words. Everything Melinda did had a pulse to it, a gentleness Ernest had forgotten could exist. One afternoon, he watched her dress the girls. For 3 years, getting them dressed had meant meltdowns and screaming. Melinda held up a shirt and swayed it softly, humming. Ella reached for it, not because she was told to, because the movement invited her. Melinda guided her arms through the sleeves in time with the rhythm, slow, steady, like water. No tears, no fight, just peace. Ernest's chest tightened. Catherine used to move like that, used to sway the girls to sleep, bounce them on her hip, hum made-up songs. She'd understood something he never had, that they didn't need fixing. They needed to be met where they were, and Melinda was doing exactly that. Then, one Thursday afternoon, something happened that made Ernest forget how to breathe. Melinda stood in the living room and raised her arms slowly, palms up, like she was lifting something invisible. She did it once, twice, a third time. And Lily, who hadn't imitated anyone in 3 years, lifted her arms too, slowly, deliberately, mirroring her. Ernest's hand froze on his laptop. His throat burned. He wanted to shout, to cry, to run into that room and thank Melinda for giving him back something he thought was gone forever. But he didn't move. He just sat there, watching this woman unlock his daughters with nothing but presence and rhythm. And that's when the question hit him like a fist to the chest. How did she know? How did a maid, someone with no credentials, no training that he knew of, understand his daughters better than 15 specialists? Better than him? Ernest stared at Melinda as she guided the girls into another gentle movement. There was something in the way she moved, something trained, something she wasn't telling him, and he needed to know what it was. That night, after the girls were asleep, Ernest made a decision. He was going to ask her. He was going to find out who Melinda Brown really was, because the woman cleaning his house was hiding something, and whatever it was, it had just brought his daughters back to life. That evening, after the girls were asleep, Ernest found Melinda in the kitchen wiping down the counters. "Melinda," his voice came out rougher than he intended. "Can you stay a moment, please?" She turned, her eyes widening slightly. In 3 years of employing various staff, Ernest had never asked anyone to stay after hours, never had a real conversation beyond scheduling and instructions. "Of course, Mr. Anderson." She set down the cloth, her hands folding neatly in front of her. He gestured to the small table by the window. "Sit, please." They sat across from each other in the dim kitchen light, and for a long moment, Ernest didn't know how to start. How do you ask someone to explain a miracle? "Where did you learn it?" he finally said. "What you do with them, the way you move, the way you reach them." Melinda's face went very still. She looked down at her hands. "I don't mean to overstep by asking," Ernest continued quickly. I need to understand. 15 specialists over 3 years couldn't do what you've done in 6 weeks. Mr. Anderson?" "Ernest, please." She looked up at him then, and he saw something in her eyes he hadn't noticed before. Pain. Deep, old pain that mirrored his own. "I wasn't always a maid," she said quietly. The words hung in the air between them. "I worked as a dance and movement therapist for 3 years. Children with special needs, mostly on the autism spectrum. I specialized in nonverbal communication." She paused, her jaw tightening. "I was good at it. Really good. Until I wasn't." Ernest leaned forward, his heart pounding. "What happened?" "Burnout." The word came out like a confession. "I took every failure personally. Every child I couldn't reach felt like I'd failed them. After 3 years, I just broke. I walked away 2 years ago and took domestic jobs to heal, to step away from the weight of it all." Ernest felt like he'd been punched in the chest. "You're a trained therapist." "Was," she corrected softly. "I gave up my license. I'm not practicing anymore." "But you saw it. From the first day, you knew what Ella and Lily needed." Melinda nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I saw it immediately. The way they moved, the way they retreated. I knew traditional verbal approaches would keep failing them, but I was terrified to say anything. Who would believe the maid?" Ernest's hands clenched on the table, not from anger at her, from rage at himself. "I've been paying you minimum wage to clean floors while you've been doing what I paid specialists 6 figures to fail at." "Mr. Anderson," "Ernest," his voice cracked. "You gave me back my daughters, Melinda, and you did it thinking you had to hide who you really are because I was too blind to see you." She looked away, a tear sliding down her cheek. "Teach me," Ernest said suddenly. "Teach me how to reach them, how to be present with them the way you are." Melinda met his eyes. "It's not about technique, Ernest. It's about showing up, being patient, meeting them in their world instead of dragging them into ours." Then teach me that, he said, because I've been absent for 3 years, and I'm ready to come home. Melinda studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Okay. But there was something else in her expression, something uncertain, like she was opening a door she'd spent 2 years keeping locked, and Ernest had no idea that inviting her deeper into their lives meant she'd eventually have to face the very thing that had broken her in the first place. A week later, Melinda found something that would change everything. Ernest had finally given her the key to Catherine's office, a room he'd kept locked for 3 years. Just do what you need to do, he'd said, his voice barely steady. Melinda worked carefully, treating everything like it was sacred. Catherine's books, her ballet slippers on the shelf, photos of her dancing before everything got harder. Then she opened the closet. Behind Catherine's wedding dress, she found a box, unmarked, dusty. Inside were dozens of small drives, each one labeled in Catherine's handwriting with dates. Some from when she was pregnant, others from when the girls were babies. The last one dated 2 days before the accident. Melinda carried the box downstairs with shaking hands. Ernest was in the kitchen, staring at his coffee. When she set the box in front of him, his face went white. I found these in her office, Melinda said quietly. I think you need to see them. Ernest stared at his wife's handwriting like it might shatter him. Will you stay? He whispered. I can't do this alone. Melinda sat beside him. Ernest plugged in the first drive. The screen flickered. Catherine appeared, pregnant, sitting in her office. She looked tired but radiant. My sweet girls, she said to the camera, if you're watching this, it means Mama isn't there to tell you herself. I know words are hard for you. So I'm recording these, my voice, my movements, my songs. So someday, even if I can't be there, you'll still have me. The video showed Catherine singing lullabies, dancing slowly, moving with the same grace Melinda had been using with the girls. Ernest's hands trembled as he opened video after video. Catherine had known. Somehow, she'd known her daughters would need this. Then he opened the final file. 2 days before the accident. Catherine looked directly into the camera, her voice steady and fierce. Ernest, if something happens to me, don't let the girls stop moving. Movement is their language. Find someone who understands that. Don't let grief freeze them. The video ended. Ernest stared at the blank screen. Then he broke. Completely. He dropped his head into his hands and sobbed, raw, unguarded sobs from a place he'd kept buried for 3 years. Melinda said nothing. She just placed her hand gently on his shoulder. When Ernest finally looked up, his face was wet, his eyes red. She knew, he whispered, and I locked it all away. You were grieving, Melinda said softly. You did what you could. Ernest shook his head. She left me a roadmap, and God sent you to help me follow it. He looked at Melinda, his jaw tight with new resolve. Will you help me use these videos with the girls? Let them hear their mother again. Melinda nodded. Every day. But as Ernest held that final drive, neither of them knew that bringing Catherine's voice back would unlock something they weren't prepared for. Something that would prove Catherine had been right about everything. 2 weeks after finding Catherine's videos, something happened that Ernest would remember for the rest of his life. They'd started incorporating Catherine's recordings into the daily sessions. Her voice filled the house again, soft, warm, alive. At first, Ernest worried it would break the girls, hearing their mother would send them spiraling back into darkness, but it didn't. Instead, Ella and Lily responded to Catherine's voice like flowers turning toward sunlight. They moved more freely, smiled more often. It was like some part of them remembered, even after 3 years of silence. That afternoon, all 3 of them were in the living room. Catherine's lullaby played softly, the one she used to sing when the girls were babies. Melinda guided them through gentle movements, her arms raised, the girls mirroring her. Ernest had started joining the sessions, not leading, just being there. Present, learning to exist in their world instead of dragging them into his. Midway through the routine, Lily suddenly stopped moving. Everyone froze. Ernest's heart dropped. Was she regressing? Was this too much? Lily stood completely still, staring at Melinda. Then, clear as daylight, she said one word. Again? The room went silent except for Catherine's voice still playing in the background. Ernest gasped, his hand flying to his mouth. Melinda's eyes filled with tears, but she kept her face calm, steady. Again? Melinda said gently. You want to do it again, sweetheart? Lily nodded, deliberately, purposefully. Then she said it again. Again. Ernest couldn't breathe. His daughter, his baby girl who hadn't spoken in 3 years, had just said a word, a real word, with meaning, with intention. Melinda raised her arms slowly, starting the movement over. This time, Lily mouthed the words silently as they moved, her lips forming it carefully. Again. When the movement ended, Lily looked at her father, really looked at him, and said something that shattered what was left of Ernest's heart. Mama singing. 2 words, full meaning. His daughter was speaking. Ernest dropped to his knees, trembling. He wanted to scream, to cry, to hold her and never let go. But he stayed still, terrified of breaking the moment. Lily walked over to him, walked, not shuffled, and placed her small hand on his cheek. Mama singing, she said again. We dance. Ernest pulled her close, and for the first time in 3 years, Lily wrapped her arms around his neck. Ella moved closer too, pressing herself against his side. Melinda knelt beside them, tears streaming down her face. Ernest looked at her, his voice breaking. She spoke. Melinda nodded, smiling through her tears. She did. That night, after the girls were asleep, Ernest sat in his office staring at his phone. He'd recorded the moment, Lily's voice saying, again, captured forever. He should have been celebrating, shouting from the rooftops, calling everyone he knew. But instead, a dark thought crept into his mind. What if someone tried to take this away? What if someone decided Melinda's methods were dangerous, unproven? He thought of Dr. Morrison, the lead behavioral therapist he'd paid $180,000 over 3 years, the one who'd told him nonverbal regression was likely permanent. She didn't know about Lily's breakthrough yet, but when she found out, what would she say? Ernest stared at Melinda's number in his phone. She'd given him everything, but he'd never told her she was more than staff, never told her she was family. And that silence might cost him everything, because the world didn't always celebrate miracles. Sometimes it questioned them. Dr. Morrison showed up unannounced 3 days after Lily spoke her first words. Ernest had made the mistake of sending her a video. Subject line, she spoke. He'd been too excited to think clearly, too grateful to consider the consequences. Dr. Morrison didn't congratulate him. She demanded to observe Melinda's methods in person. Ernest tried to say no. But 3 years of conditioning, 3 years of trusting credentials over instinct, made him agree. That afternoon, Dr. Morrison sat in the corner of the living room, her face unreadable as she watched. Melinda guided Ella and Lily through their routine. Catherine's voice played softly. The girls moved with focus, with joy. Lily used her new words. Again, more, Mama singing. Ella showed clear engagement, her eyes bright and present. To anyone else, it would have looked like a miracle. Dr. Morrison saw something different. After the session, she pulled Ernest into the hallway, her expression severe. Mr. Anderson, what I just witnessed is dangerous. Ernest blinked. Dangerous? My daughter is speaking again. Unregulated methodology, Dr. Morrison said sharply. Movement therapy without proper clinical oversight. This woman has no active license, no accountability. What she's doing is pseudoscience masquerading as treatment. Ernest's jaw tightened. It's working. Is it? Dr. Morrison's voice dropped. Or is your daughter simply parroting sounds? Echolalia is common in autism. This could be meaningless repetition, not true communication. And encouraging it without proper assessment could cause regression worse than before. Ernest felt his stomach turn. You're saying she's not really speaking? I'm saying you're gambling with your daughter's futures. Dr. Morrison glanced toward the living room where Melinda was cleaning up. That woman is playing therapist without credentials. I have an ethical obligation to report this to Child Protective Services. The words hit Ernest like ice water. You're threatening to call CPS? I'm protecting your children from harm. Dr. Morrison's face softened slightly. Ernest, I understand you're desperate, but you've invested 3 years in evidence-based approaches. Don't throw that away for unproven methods delivered by domestic staff. Ernest stood there, caught between two realities. Dr. Morrison represented everything he'd been taught to trust: degrees, institutions, clinical distance. She'd taken $180,000 of his money over 3 years and produced nothing but reports and cautious prognoses. Then he thought of Melinda. No credentials on his payroll, just presence, just patience, just 3 years of training she'd walked away from because she cared too much. And his daughters, actually present, actually responding, actually alive for the first time since Catherine died. Ernest looked Dr. Morrison in the eye. You had 3 years, he said quietly. 3 years and $2 million. You gave me charts and clinical assessments, but you never gave me hope. Mr. Anderson, Melinda gave me my daughters back in 6 weeks. His voice was steady now, certain. She learned their language. You tried to force them to learn yours. Dr. Morrison's face hardened. You're making a mistake. Then it's mine to make. Ernest moved toward the door, opening it. We're done here, Dr. Morrison. Send whatever reports you need to send, but you're not coming back into my house. She stared at him, stunned. Then she gathered her things and left without another word. Ernest stood in the empty hallway, his heart pounding. He'd just chosen an unlicensed maid over a board-certified specialist. He'd just bet everything on something he couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't witnessed it. And he had no idea if he'd just saved his daughters or destroyed them. From the living room, he heard Lily's voice. Daddy, come. His daughter. Calling him. With words. Ernest walked back into the room where Melinda stood with both girls, uncertainty written across her face. She'd heard everything. Is everything okay? She asked quietly. Ernest knelt beside his daughters. Everything's perfect. But the look in Melinda's eyes told him she didn't believe it. And deep down, Ernest knew the truth. Dr. Morrison wasn't done, and the battle for his daughter's future had just begun. 3 days after Dr. Morrison's visit, Ernest found Melinda packing. He'd come home early, as usual. But instead of finding her in the living room with the girls, he heard movement upstairs. When he reached her room in the guest wing, the door was open. Her belongings were in boxes. Ernest's chest tightened. What are you doing? Melinda didn't turn around. I'm giving my 2 weeks' notice, Mr. Anderson. The formal title hit him like a slap. She hadn't called him that since the night they watched Catherine's videos. Why? His voice came out rougher than he intended. She finally looked at him, and her eyes were red. My sister runs a cleaning company in Philadelphia. She offered me a supervisor position, better pay, less complicated. Complicated? Ernest stepped into the room. Melinda, what's this really about? She set down the sweater she'd been folding, her hands trembling. I overstepped. I'm not their mother. I'm not their therapist. I'm just the maid. And after what Dr. Morrison said, Dr. Morrison is wrong. Is she? Melinda's voice cracked. What if she's right? What if I'm doing more harm than good? What if Lily's words don't mean anything? What if I've been playing pretend this whole time and I'm too blind to see it? Ernest stared at her. You don't believe that? I don't know what I believe anymore. Tears spilled down her cheeks. But I know I can't be the reason someone calls CPS on you. I can't be the reason you lose your daughters. You're the reason I have them back. Melinda shook her head. I'm staff, Ernest. That's all I am. That's all I should be. The words hung between them like a wall. Ernest realized with sickening clarity that he'd done this. He'd never told her she was more than that, never made her feel like family. He'd let her exist in this impossible space, essential but invisible, saving his life while believing she was just doing her job. When are you leaving? He asked quietly. 2 weeks. She wiped her eyes. I'll stay through the transition. Help you find someone else. Ernest wanted to argue, to beg, to tell her she couldn't be replaced, but the words stuck in his throat, tangled up with 3 years of grief and guilt he didn't know how to voice, so he just nodded. Okay. Melinda's face crumpled for a moment before she turned away. I'll finish packing later. The girls need lunch. She walked past him, and Ernest let her go. He stood alone in her half-empty room, feeling like the ground was crumbling beneath him, and he had no idea how to stop it. The next morning, everything changed. Melinda came to work but kept her distance, professional, polite, careful not to get too close. She still did her job, made meals, cleaned, kept things running. But she didn't hum anymore, didn't sway while she worked, didn't move with that gentle rhythm the girls had learned to follow. And Ella and Lily felt it immediately. By afternoon, Lily had stopped using her new words. She stood at the living room window, rocking slightly, staring outside like she was waiting for something that wouldn't come. Ella retreated to the corner and began spinning, slow, repetitive circles she hadn't done in weeks. Ernest watched it happen in real time, watched his daughter slip backward into the silence they'd just escaped. That night, he found them both at the window again, still waiting. Lily's small hand pressed against the glass, and Ernest understood. They weren't waiting for something. They were waiting for someone. For Melinda. The woman who'd brought them back to life. The woman who was leaving in 2 weeks. And Ernest had just let her walk away without a fight. By the second day, Lily stopped eating. Ernest sat at the kitchen table watching his daughter push food around her plate without taking a single bite. She hadn't spoken since Melinda pulled away. Not a single word. Just silence and that constant staring out the window. Every afternoon at 3 o'clock, the exact time Melinda used to start their sessions, both girls would go to the living room window and wait. They'd stand there for an hour, sometimes longer, just watching the driveway, waiting for her to come back. Ella had started rocking again, the repetitive motion she'd finally stopped weeks ago, back and forth, her eyes unfocused and distant. Ernest tried. God knows he tried. He put on Catherine's recordings, raised his arms the way Melinda had, moved slowly, gently, trying to remember everything he'd watched her do. But it didn't work. The girls wouldn't engage, wouldn't look at him. It was like they'd learned a language from Melinda that Ernest still couldn't speak, no matter how hard he tried. On the 3rd day, something happened that destroyed him. He found Ella in the living room trying to dance alone, her small arms raised toward the ceiling, her body swaying awkwardly, unsteadily. She was trying to recreate what Melinda had taught her, trying to hold onto it, but she couldn't sustain it. After a few moments, her arms dropped, her face crumpled, and tears, actual tears, rolled down her cheeks. Ernest hadn't seen his daughter cry in 3 years, not since before Catherine died. He moved toward her, but Ella turned away from him, pressed her face against the window, and kept crying silently, her small shoulders shaking. Ernest stood there helpless, watching his daughter grieve for someone who was still alive but might as well be gone. That night, after both girls finally fell asleep, Ernest went to his office. He sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about Dr. Morrison's threats, about Melinda's boxes packed upstairs, about his daughters standing at that window day after day. Then he did something he hadn't done since the night they first watched the videos. He opened Catherine's final recording, the one where she looked directly into the camera and spoke to him. Ernest, if something happens to me, don't let the girls stop moving. Movement is their language. Find someone who understands that. Don't let grief freeze them. Ernest had heard those words before, but this time they hit differently. Catherine hadn't just been talking about the girls. She'd been talking about him. For 3 years, he'd been frozen, buried in work, hiding from the house, avoiding connection because it hurt too much. And when someone finally came along who could unfreeze his daughters, who could unfreeze him, he'd let her believe she was nothing more than staff. He'd let grief make him blind. Ernest stared at his wife's face on the screen, and suddenly he understood what he had to do. Melinda was leaving in less than 2 weeks. His daughters were disappearing again. And if he didn't do something, if he didn't find the courage to say what he'd been too afraid to say, he was going to lose everything that mattered, not just for Ella and Lily, for himself. Because somewhere between watching Melinda dance with his daughters and seeing her pack her bags, Ernest had fallen in love with her, and he'd never told her. Ernest caught Melinda on her last day. She was loading the final box into her car when he pulled into the driveway. Behind her, through the living room window, he could see Ella and Lily standing in their usual spot, waiting, like they had every day at 3 o'clock for 2 weeks. Melinda. His voice stopped her mid-motion. She turned, her eyes red and tired. Mr. Anderson, Don't. He walked toward her, his heart pounding. Don't call me that, and don't leave, not yet, please. Ernest, we've been through this. I need to show you something. He gestured toward the house. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. She hesitated, then nodded. He led her inside, past the living room where the girls immediately perked up seeing Melinda, past the kitchen, down the hallway to the door that had been locked for 3 years. Catherine's music room. Ernest pulled out the key, his hand steady this time. I've been working on this every night for 2 weeks. He pushed the door open. Melinda gasped. The room was transformed, soft lighting, Catherine's sound system restored, and covering every wall, dozens of Ella's drawings. Every single one showed the same thing. 4 people holding hands, dancing, and above them, in the corner of each drawing, a blonde woman in a flowing dress, smiling down. Catherine, watching over them. This is where Catherine practiced, Ernest said quietly, where she danced when she was pregnant with the girls, where she planned to teach them someday. He turned to face Melinda fully. I locked this room for 3 years because I couldn't face it, but you've been unlocking everything I closed. Melinda's eyes filled with tears. Ernest took a breath. You're not just the maid, Melinda. You never were. You saved my daughters. You saved me. And I let you think you were nothing more than staff, because I was too afraid to admit what was really happening. Ernest, I'm in love with you. The words came out raw, honest. I don't know when it happened. Maybe the first time I saw you dance with them. Maybe when you sat with me while I watched Catherine's videos. But I can't let you walk out that door without telling you the truth. Melinda covered her mouth, tears streaming. I'm not asking you to stay as an employee, Ernest continued. I'm asking you to stay as family. Because that's what you are, to Ella and Lily, to me. From the hallway came a small voice. Melly? They both turned. Ella and Lily stood in the doorway, drawn by Melinda's presence. Ernest knelt down. Girls, come here. They moved slowly into the room, their eyes wide as they saw the drawings covering the walls. Lily pointed at one. We draw. You did, Ernest said gently, because you knew. You knew before I did. He looked at Melinda. Will you help me do this right? Help me honor Catherine by refusing to stay frozen? Melinda couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears falling freely. Ernest pressed play on Catherine's recordings. Her voice filled the room, the lullaby she used to sing. For a moment, everyone froze. Then slowly, Lily began to sway. Ella reached for Melinda's hand. Melinda took it, then reached for Ernest's. He grasped it like a lifeline. The 4 of them formed a circle in the center of Catherine's music room, and they began to move. Not perfect, not choreographed, just honest, real, present. Midway through the song, Lily stopped. Everyone held their breath. Then she spoke, clear and full. Mama singing, we dancing, Mama happy. Ernest's face crumpled. He dropped to his knees, and 3 years of held-back grief finally broke free. Both girls wrapped their arms around his neck without hesitation. Melinda knelt beside them, her hand on Ernest's shoulder. I miss her, Ernest choked out, the first time he'd said it aloud to his daughters. I miss her so much. Ella pressed her forehead to his. Didn't speak, but her eyes said everything. I know, me too. They stayed like that, holding each other in Catherine's room, surrounded by her voice, and for the first time in 3 years, grief didn't feel like drowning. It felt like release. When they finally stood, Ella took Ernest's hand. Lily took Melinda's. Then the girls joined their free hands, completing the circle. Again, Lily said softly. They danced, and when Ernest looked at Melinda across the circle, he saw not just the woman who saved his daughters. He saw the woman he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. But there was still one question neither of them had answered out loud. Would Melinda stay? 6 months later, everything had changed. Ernest stood in the kitchen on a Saturday morning, watching through the window as Melinda taught the girls a new routine in the backyard. Spring had arrived in Denver, bringing warmth and color back to a house that had been frozen for too long. Ella and Lily were 7 now. Lily spoke in full sentences, over 200 words in her vocabulary. She asked questions, told stories, laughed freely. Ella communicated her own way, some words, mostly movement and gestures, and that was beautiful too. She didn't need to be like everyone else. She just needed to be seen. They weren't cured. Autism wasn't something that needed curing, but they were whole, connected, loved exactly as they were. Melinda had stayed, not in the guest wing as staff, but as part of the family. The girls called her Melly, and every afternoon at 3 o'clock, they still gathered in Catherine's music room to dance, not because they had to, because they wanted to. Ernest joined them now, not leading, just present. He learned to parent on his daughter's terms, to communicate through patience instead of pressure, to see their autism not as a tragedy, but as a different way of experiencing the world. That afternoon, as music drifted through the open windows and the girls spun barefoot in the grass, Ernest walked outside. Melinda noticed him and smiled, the kind of smile that still made his chest tighten. She left the girls chasing butterflies and sat beside him on the porch steps. "Do you ever regret it?" Ernest asked quietly. "Staying here? Giving up Philadelphia?" Melinda watched Ella and Lily dancing in the sunlight, their laughter carrying on the breeze. She thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago, burned out, broken, convinced she'd failed everyone she tried to help. Then she looked at these 2 extraordinary girls who'd taught her that healing wasn't linear. That connection didn't require perfection, that love could exist in silence and movement and patient presence. "I didn't give up anything," she said softly. "I found everything." Ernest took her hand. "These girls taught me something too, that I can't control everything, that sometimes the best thing I can do is just show up." "And you do," Melinda said, "every single day." From across the yard, Lily called out, "Daddy, Melly, come dance." Ernest and Melinda stood. As they walked toward the girls, Ella ran up and grabbed both their hands, pulling them into a circle. Catherine's old music played from the speaker Ernest had brought outside. And there, in the backyard where grief had once made everything gray, 4 people danced together. Not perfect, not choreographed, just real. Ernest looked at Melinda, and she looked back. In her eyes, he saw the future, messy and beautiful and full of grace. Later that evening, after the girls were asleep, Ernest found the photo Melinda had taken that afternoon. All 4 of them mid-spin, arms raised, faces bright with joy. He placed it on the mantel beside Catherine's portrait. 2 images, 2 chapters of love, both true, both sacred. Beneath the new photo, Ella had written in careful letters, "We dance, we love, we family." Ernest traced the words with his finger. For 3 years he'd believed healing meant forgetting, that moving forward meant leaving Catherine behind. But his daughters had taught him something better. Healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant transforming pain into presence. It meant honoring what was lost by choosing to fully live. Catherine's voice would always be part of their story. Her love hadn't ended when she died. It had just learned new steps. And standing in his living room, looking at the 2 portraits side by side, Ernest understood what God had been whispering all along. Love doesn't replace love. It multiplies. Grace doesn't erase grief. It walks beside it. And sometimes the miracle you're praying for doesn't look like what you expected. Sometimes it shows up wearing an apron, speaking a language you forgot existed, and teaching you that the way back to life isn't through fixing what's broken, it's through learning to dance again. Outside, rain began to fall, soft and gentle, like the rain that had fallen the day Catherine died. But inside, there was only warmth, only music, only the sound of a family that had learned to breathe again. And in that Denver home, beneath a sky that had seen so much sorrow, healing danced on. Barefoot, imperfect, and beautifully, beautifully real.
The house was never this quiet. Andrew opened the door. No screaming, no crashing, no chaos. His sons were 5 years old. 17 nannies had quit. Nobody could handle them. But today, silence. He called their names. Nothing. Room by room, he searched. Kitchen empty, playroom empty. Then he opened the last door, and what he saw stopped his heart cold. Andrew Taylor wasn't supposed to be home. The London deal closed early. For the first time in 5 years, he said no to another meeting. He just wanted to go home. When he walked through the door that Tuesday afternoon, he expected war. That's what life sounded like with 3 boys who'd lost their mother the day they were born. But today, nothing. He dropped his briefcase. Boys? No answer. He moved faster. Kitchen empty. Playroom empty. His chest got tight. One more room. He pushed open the nursery door and froze. Joshua, James, John, on their knees, hands folded, and beside them, Sarah Jackson, the maid from Atlanta doing something no nanny had ever tried. Andrew's legs gave out. 5 years. He hadn't cried once. Not when Victoria died. Not when 17 professionals called his sons impossible. But this broke him. That night, alone in the dark, her voice came back. You can build an empire, Andrew, but you can't buy back time. And he realized this wasn't a breakdown. This was God giving him one more chance. The next morning, he came downstairs, made coffee, burned toast. When Sarah walked in, surprised, he looked at her and said, I'll stay for breakfast. Minutes later, the boys ran in, froze when they saw him. Dad, you're home? He smiled. A real smile. Yeah, I missed you guys. They sat down. 3 bowls, 1 burnt toast, a silence that felt like peace. And Andrew knew something had shifted, but he had no idea what was coming next. Before we begin, like this video, subscribe, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I hope this story reminds you sometimes God doesn't send angels, he sends people willing to stay. 5 years ago, the delivery room was too bright. Andrew stood there in scrubs he didn't know how to wear, holding Victoria's hand. She was pale, too pale. The doctors kept moving faster, their voices getting sharper, and he knew before they said it. Andrew. Her voice was so soft he almost couldn't hear her. Her eyes found his. Take care of them. 3 newborn cries filled the room. Joshua, James, John. Victoria smiled. Then her hand went limp in his. She was gone. The nurses moved around him, but Andrew couldn't move, couldn't speak. His wife just brought 3 sons into the world, and it cost her everything. He held her hand long after it went cold. He never got to introduce her to their boys. At the funeral, people kept saying the same things. Time heals. You'll be okay. The boys will get you through this. But they didn't understand. Every time Andrew looked at Joshua, James, and John, all he saw was what their birth had cost him. The woman he loved. The life they were supposed to build. Gone. All of it. Gone. So he stopped looking. The first 2 years were a blur. He hired nannies. Good ones. Expensive ones. Women with degrees and references and years of experience. He told himself the boys would be fine, that they'd grow up loved and cared for. But Andrew? He disappeared. Into boardrooms. Into late-night calls. Into international deals that took him to London, Tokyo, Dubai, anywhere but home. Work became the only thing that made sense. Stock prices went up. Buildings went up. Everything went up except the sound of his own sons' voices, because Andrew Taylor stopped coming home for dinner, stopped reading bedtime stories, stopped being a father. He told himself it was temporary, that once the pain faded, He'd come back. He'd be present. He'd be the dad Victoria wanted him to be. But grief doesn't fade. It just settles in and waits. By the time the boys turned 3, they stopped asking where Daddy was. By 4, they stopped running to the door when he came home. By 5, they stopped believing he'd ever really stay. And that's when everything started to break. The nannies started calling more, then texting, then showing up at his office unannounced, eyes wide, voices shaking. "Mr. Taylor, we need to talk about the boys." But Andrew didn't want to talk. He'd send more money, hire more help, fix it from a distance, until the day the 17th nanny walked out, and nobody would come back. By the time Joshua, James, and John turned 5, the house in McLean had become a war zone. Not because the boys were bad, but because they were drowning. They didn't remember their mother. They'd never heard her voice, never felt her hold them, but they knew something was missing, something everyone else seemed to have. And the person who was supposed to fill that space, their father, he was gone too. So they learned to scream. Joshua was the first to break. At 3 years old, he threw a toy car through the kitchen window. By 5, he was throwing chairs. He pushed Nanny Rebecca down 3 stairs, locked Nanny Caroline in the closet for 2 hours. Nobody could stop him once he started. Anger was the only language he knew. James was different. He stopped talking at 4. Just stopped. The doctors said there was nothing physically wrong, but words felt too heavy, too big, so he screamed instead. Long, sharp cries that made the staff cover their ears, and when he wasn't screaming, he was silent, completely silent. John was the quiet one, the one people thought was fine. But at night, he had nightmares so bad he'd wake up shaking. He clung to whoever was near, nannies, housekeepers, anyone terrified they'd disappear too. And sometimes, when no one was watching, he'd light matches, small ones, just to see the flame, just to feel something warm. The nannies came with degrees, with references, with years of experience working with difficult children, but none of them lasted. Nanny Diane quit after 3 days, said the boys were beyond help. Nanny Margaret lasted 2 weeks, filed a complaint, said Joshua was dangerous. Nanny Ruth made it 4 months, longest one yet, but even she broke. Told Andrew the boys didn't need a nanny, they needed a father. Then she walked out and never came back. 17 women in 3 years. The agencies stopped sending people, stopped returning Andrew's calls. One director told him flat out, "Mr. Taylor, your sons have a reputation. No one wants to work in that house." Andrew hired private therapists, behavioral specialists, experts who came in with charts and strategies and promises. But nothing worked, because the boys weren't broken. They were just waiting for someone to see them, really see them, and no one did. Until 3 weeks ago, when a woman showed up with a mop, a quiet voice, and no reason to stay. Her name was Sarah Jackson, and she wasn't supposed to change anything. Sarah Jackson wasn't supposed to be there. The cleaning agency sent her as a last-minute replacement. No interview, no background check, just a phone call at 6 in the morning, asking if she could start that day. She showed up at the McLean house with a small bag, a reference letter from a church shelter in Atlanta, and a quiet good morning that nobody really heard. Andrew barely looked up from his phone. "You're the new maid?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Just clean what you can. Stay out of the boys' way." He left for the office 10 minutes later. Sarah stood in the big, silent house and took a breath. She'd cleaned plenty of homes before, rich ones, empty ones. Homes where people lived but didn't really live. This one felt different, colder. She started in the kitchen, scrubbed counters, swept floors, folded laundry no one had touched in days. Everything was expensive, everything was clean, but nothing felt warm. Then she heard footsteps. 3 boys appeared in the doorway, staring at her, not saying a word. "Hi," she said softly. "I'm Sarah." Joshua, the oldest by 2 minutes, tilted his head, then picked up a plate and threw it at her. It shattered against the wall behind her head. Sarah didn't flinch, didn't yell. She just looked at him. "You done?" He blinked. No one had ever asked him that before. James started screaming. No words, just sound, high-pitched and sharp. Sarah stayed still, waited, let him get it out. John walked over, grabbed her mop, and locked her in the supply closet. She heard the lock click, heard their footsteps run away, heard laughter echo down the hall. Most people would have called Andrew. Quit on the spot, packed their bags and left. Sarah sat down on a bucket in the dark closet, pulled out her phone, and prayed. 20 minutes later, the housekeeper found her and let her out. "You all right?" the woman asked, eyes wide. Sarah nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine. You're not gonna quit?" Sarah looked down the hall where the boys had disappeared. "No, not yet." That night, after everyone went to bed, Sarah walked upstairs. The boys' rooms were at the end of the hall. She could hear them. Whispers. Movement. No sleep. She knocked softly. "Can I come in?" Silence. She opened the door anyway. All 3 boys were awake, sitting on their beds, staring at her like she was a ghost. Sarah didn't say anything at first. She just walked over, pulled their 3 beds together, sat down on the edge. "You can test me," she said quietly. "You can throw things, scream, lock me in closets. I get it." Joshua narrowed his eyes. "You're gonna leave. Everyone does." Sarah looked right at him. "I'm not everyone." James made a sound, not a scream, something softer, like he wanted to believe her but didn't know how. John climbed under his blanket and turned away. Sarah stayed there for a while, didn't force anything, didn't try to fix them, just sat, present, still. Then she started talking, told them a story about 3 baby birds who fell from their nest during a storm, how they were scared, how they didn't think anyone would find them, but someone did, someone stayed. By the end, Tommy had stopped fidgeting, James's breathing had slowed, and John, he'd turned around, listening. When Sarah stood to leave, Joshua spoke, voice small. "Are you coming back tomorrow?" She looked at him. "Yeah, I'll be here." "Promise?" "Promise." The next morning, Sarah found a small grey rock on her pillow, a smiley face drawn on it in red crayon. No note, but she knew. It was from John, and for the first time in 3 years, something in that house started to soften. But Sarah had no idea what was coming. The first week, Sarah learned their rhythms. Joshua got angry when things were too loud, so she started humming, soft, low, just background noise that somehow made him breathe slower. James drew when he couldn't speak. She found old sketch pads in the storage room, left them on the kitchen table with colored pencils, never said a word about it, just let them be there. John collected rocks. Every day, he'd bring her a new one, set it on the counter while she worked. She started giving him small jars, helped him label them. Found by the mailbox, from the backyard. He never said thank you, but he'd smile, just a little. The staff noticed, whispered to each other when Sarah walked by. "She's lasting longer than the others." But Sarah wasn't trying to last. She was just trying to see them. One afternoon, Joshua threw a chair. Not at anyone, just threw it, hard. Sarah didn't jump, didn't lecture. She walked over, sat on the floor beside him, and said, "That must have felt good." He stared at her. "What?" "Throwing it, getting it out, must have felt good." His face crumpled. "I don't know why I do it." "I know," she said softly. "Sometimes the hurt gets so big, it has to go somewhere." He didn't say anything, just sat down next to her, and for the first time, he didn't destroy anything else that day. At night, Sarah started sitting with them before bed. She didn't read books, didn't lecture, she just talked, quiet, easy, about nothing and everything. And sometimes, when the boys were really quiet, she'd close her eyes and pray, not loud, not showy, just a whisper. "God, thank you for today, for these boys, for second chances." They watched her, didn't join in, but they watched. Andrew came home twice that week, both times after the boys were asleep. He'd walk past their rooms, see the light off, and keep moving. Sarah saw him once in the hallway. "Mr. Taylor, the boys were asking about you today." He nodded, didn't look at her. "I'll try to be home earlier next week." But he wouldn't be, and they both knew it. By the 3rd week, the house felt different, softer. The boys still had hard days, still broke things, still screamed, but something was shifting. Sarah felt it. The boys felt it. But Andrew? He was in London, then Tokyo, then back to D.C. for another deal. He had no idea what was happening in his own home until the morning everything broke wide open. It happened on a Thursday morning. Sarah was in the kitchen, wiping down counters, when she heard the crash. Then another, then screaming. She dropped the rag and ran. The playroom was destroyed. Toys everywhere. A lamp shattered on the floor. Joshua was throwing books at the wall. James was screaming no words, just sound, his face red, tears streaming. John was in the corner, rocking back and forth, hands over his ears. The housekeeper ran past Sarah, heading for the door. "I'm calling Mr. Taylor." "Wait." But she was already gone. Sarah stood in the doorway, glass on the floor, chaos everywhere. 3 boys falling apart. She could leave, walk out like everyone else, call it too much, say she tried, but she didn't. She walked into the room, knelt down on the floor, right in the middle of the broken glass. "Joshua," she said softly. He turned, chest heaving, fists clenched. "Go away. Come here." "No." "Joshua, come here." Something in her voice made him stop, made him look at her, really look. She held out her hands. "Come here, please." He didn't move at first. Then slowly, he walked over, sat down in front of her. James stopped screaming, watched. John lifted his head. Sarah took Joshua's hands, then reached for James, then John. All 3 of them, sitting in a circle on the floor, surrounded by broken things. "Close your eyes," she whispered. They didn't understand, but they did it anyway. Sarah bowed her head. "God, we're really angry right now. We're scared. We don't understand why things hurt so much." Joshua's breath hitched. "But we're here, and you're here, and that's enough." James's shoulders started shaking. "Thank you for helping us. Even when it's hard, even when we break things, you still love us." John squeezed her hand tighter. Then Joshua whispered, "God, I'm sorry I get so mad. I don't know why I do it." James, voice trembling, said, "Please help us. We just want our dad back." John didn't say anything, just cried, quietly, finally letting it out. Sarah held them, all 3, and for the first time in years, the house was completely still, not empty. Still, that's when she felt it. Someone watching. She looked up. Andrew was standing in the doorway, his briefcase on the floor, his face pale, eyes wide. He'd seen everything, and he couldn't move. Andrew didn't remember walking into the house, didn't remember dropping his briefcase, didn't remember climbing the stairs. All he remembered was opening that door and seeing his sons, his wild, broken, unreachable sons, kneeling with Sarah, praying. Joshua whispering, "Thank you for helping me not be so angry." James saying, "We just want our dad back." John holding Sarah's hand like she was the only solid thing left in the world. And Andrew, he couldn't breathe. He slid down the wall, right there in the doorway, his expensive suit crumpling, his chest cracking wide open. 5 years. He hadn't cried in 5 years, but watching them, watching this woman do what 17 professionals couldn't, he fell completely apart. They didn't see him, they just kept praying, and Andrew knew, right then. He'd been wrong about everything. That night, he couldn't sleep, sat in his office staring at nothing, thinking about Victoria, about the boys, about the father he'd stopped being. He thought about calling Richard, his business partner, the man who helped him build everything after Victoria died. But he didn't, because for the first time in years, work didn't feel like the answer. The next morning, Andrew came downstairs, made coffee, actually sat at the table. When the boys ran in and saw him, they froze. "Dad?" He smiled. "Hey, guys." They didn't know what to do, so they just stood there. Sarah walked in, surprised. "Mr. Taylor, you're home." "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm home." It felt like a beginning, but 2 days later, Richard Hale showed up, unannounced. Andrew was in his home office when Richard walked in. No knock, no warning. His face was tight. "We need to talk." Andrew looked up. "About what?" Richard pulled out his phone, showed him a photo. Sarah, kneeling with the boys, praying. "About this." Andrew's jaw tightened. "Where did you get that?" "Doesn't matter." "Andrew, do you understand what this looks like? A maid, praying with your sons, acting like she's family. She's helping them. She's destroying everything we've built." Richard's voice got sharp. "The press gets hold of this? A housekeeper raising the Taylor heirs? Our reputation is done. The company's done." Andrew stood up slowly. "Richard, fire her. Today." "No." Richard blinked. "What?" "I said no. Andrew, listen to me. I've got lawyers ready, PR ready. I even found a new nanny, Swiss, PhD in child psychology. She can start Monday. I don't care. Richard's face went red. You're choosing a maid over a $600 million deal? Over everything we've worked for? Andrew's voice didn't shake. She's helping my sons. That's all that matters. Then you're making a mistake. Maybe, but she stays. Richard stared at him, then shook his head, walked toward the door. But in the hallway, Sarah stood frozen, holding folded towels. She'd heard every word, every single word. And that night, she made a choice Andrew would never see coming. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the small bag she'd brought from Atlanta. Everything she owned fit inside it. She thought about the boys, about Joshua's slow smile when he didn't throw things, about James's drawings, about John's rocks lined up on her windowsill. She thought about Andrew, the way he'd stood up to Richard, the way his voice didn't shake when he said, "She stays." But she also heard Richard's words, "You're destroying everything we've built," and she knew what that meant. If she stayed, Andrew would lose his company, his reputation, everything he'd worked for since Victoria died. And the boys. They'd grow up knowing they were the reason it all fell apart. She couldn't let that happen. At 4 a.m, Sarah pulled out a piece of paper, wrote slowly, carefully, "Mr. Taylor, they don't need me. They need their father. I was just here to show them they're worth staying for. I'm sorry I couldn't be both. Sarah." She folded it, left it on his desk, then quietly walked out the front door. The early morning bus to Atlanta left at 5. She didn't look back. When the sun came up, Joshua was the first one awake. He ran to Sarah's room like he did every morning, knocked on the door. "Sarah?" "Nothing." He pushed it open. The bed was made. Her bag was gone. The jars of rocks she'd given John gone. His chest got tight. "Sarah?" James came running, saw the empty room, started breathing fast. John walked in last, looked at the windowsill where his rocks used to be. His face went white. "Where is she?" Joshua's voice cracked. They searched the whole house, every room, every closet, screaming her name. Then they found Andrew, sitting in his office, holding a piece of paper. Joshua ran in. "Dad, where's Sarah?" Andrew looked up. His face was pale, eyes red. "She's gone." "What?" James's voice was barely a whisper. "She left." Joshua's face went red. "No, no," she promised. She promised she wouldn't leave. He grabbed the desk, threw a chair. "Where is she?" James started screaming. That sound, that awful sound they hadn't heard in weeks. John collapsed on the floor, rocking, whispering over and over, "She promised, she promised, she promised." Andrew watched his sons fall apart, watched everything Sarah had built crumble in seconds, and something inside him snapped. He stood up, grabbed his phone. "Get the jet ready, now." His assistant's voice was confused. "Sir, fuel it. Meet me at Dulles in 30 minutes. He hung up, looked at the boys. "Get dressed, all of you." Joshua looked up, tears streaming. "Why?" Andrew's voice didn't shake. "Because we're going to Atlanta." "What?" "We're bringing her home." 20 minutes later, they were in the car. Joshua, James, and John in the back seat. Andrew driving too fast. Nobody spoke. When they pulled up to Dulles, Andrew's pilot was already waiting on the tarmac. "Sir, we're fueled and ready." "Good. Let's go." They were halfway up the jet stairs when Andrew heard a voice behind him. "Andrew." "Wait." He turned. Richard Hale stood at the bottom of the steps, out of breath, face pale. Andrew's jaw tightened. "Richard, I don't have time." "I know." Richard's voice cracked. "I know. Just listen. Please." Andrew stopped. The boys watched from inside the plane. Richard looked down, hands shaking. "I had a daughter once." Andrew blinked. "What?" "Emma. She's 28 now, lives in Seattle." Richard's voice broke. "She stopped calling me 5 years ago, stopped texting, stopped trying." "Richard, I chose the company over her. Every single time." His eyes were red. "Every birthday, every graduation, every time she needed me, I was in a meeting, closing a deal, building something that didn't matter." Andrew didn't move. "She got married last year." Richard wiped his eyes. "I wasn't invited. Didn't even know until I saw the photos online. The silence was heavy. Richard looked up at the boys, then back at Andrew. "Don't make my mistake. Don't lose them because you're afraid of what people think." He took a breath. "Go get her." Andrew's throat tightened. He nodded once. "Thank you." Richard stepped back, watched as the jet door closed, watched as it pulled away. For the first time in 30 years, Richard Hale stood alone on a tarmac and cried. Inside the plane, the boys were quiet. Joshua held a crumpled drawing. James clutched a rock. John stared out the window, whispering, "Please let her be there, please." Andrew looked at them. His sons. The ones he'd been too afraid to love. "She'll be there," he said quietly, "and we're not leaving without her." 2 hours later, they landed in Atlanta. A car was waiting. Andrew gave the driver one address. Auburn Avenue, the old brick church. Joshua sat forward. "How do you know she's there?" Andrew looked out the window. "Because that's where people go when they need to pray." 15 minutes later, the car stopped. Small brick building, wooden doors, quiet street. Andrew stepped out. The boys followed. He pushed the door open slowly, and there she was, kneeling at the front, alone, head bowed, praying through her tears. She didn't hear them at first. Then Joshua's voice shattered the silence. "Sarah." Sarah's head lifted. She turned, eyes wide, disbelief flooding her face. And then they ran. Joshua, James, John, all three crashing into her arms, holding on like she was the only thing keeping them from falling apart. "You left," Joshua sobbed into her shoulder. "You promised." "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." James couldn't speak, just cried, held her tighter. John whispered, "I thought you weren't coming back." Sarah pulled them closer. "I'm here. I'm right here." Andrew stood at the back of the church, watching, throat tight. Then he walked forward, slowly, each step heavier than the last. Sarah looked up, saw him, her eyes filled with tears. He stopped a few feet away, knelt down. "I let you go," he said, voice breaking. "I told Richard no, but I didn't fight hard enough. I didn't tell you." He swallowed hard. "I didn't tell you that we need you, that I need you." Sarah's breath caught. "I haven't been a father to them," Andrew continued. "I've been a ghost, running from everything that hurt. But you showed me what love actually looks like. You showed them they matter." His voice cracked. "Please, come home, not as the maid, as family." The boys held their breath. Sarah wiped her eyes, looked at Joshua, at James, at John. Then she looked at Andrew. "Yes," she whispered, "I'll come home." Andrew exhaled, relief washing over him like a wave. Joshua smiled through his tears. James let out a breath he'd been holding for days. John reached for Sarah's hand and didn't let go. They sat there in that quiet church, 4 broken people, learning what it meant to be whole again. 3 months later, the McLean house felt different, warmer, alive. Andrew came home for dinner every night, sometimes early. The boys still had hard days, still broke things sometimes, but they were healing. One evening, Andrew gathered them in the living room. Sarah sat on the couch, confused. He knelt in front of her, the boys beside him. "You didn't just teach them to pray," Andrew said quietly. "You taught me how to be present, how to stay, how to choose love over fear." He pulled 3 small envelopes from his pocket, handed them to the boys. "They wanted to ask you themselves." Joshua, James, and John each gave her a letter. Inside, crayon drawings, the 4 of them holding hands. And in wobbly handwriting, the same question. "Will you stay forever?" Sarah's hands trembled. Tears fell. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll stay." Andrew took her hand. "Then stay. Help me raise them. Help me build a home again. Not as the help, as the heart of this family." She nodded. "I will." And for the first time in 5 years, Andrew Taylor stepped fully into fatherhood. Not perfect, but present. Not because someone forced him, but because someone loved his sons enough to show him the way back. And sometimes, that's all grace is. Showing up, staying, and letting love do what money never could.